Boyfriend hid old nudes, liked ex's selfie secretly, and now I'm torn on how to approach this amidst family tragedy. I've been dating my boyfriend for about 3 months, not very long, but long enough for things to get interesting. Everything was going really well, we get along, we laugh a lot, and though we've had a few disagreements, it all felt like the natural course of getting to know someone new. One night, we were just lying in bed. Out of nowhere, he took my phone from behind my back literally and put my password in. I could feel him fumbling around and turned to see what he was up to. He told me he was just posting something funny to one of my social media profiles. Maybe he was being immature, or maybe, if it wasn't true, it was just sketchy. Either way, it didn't sit right with me. So, a few minutes later, I did the same thing to him. I grabbed his phone to post something funny, thinking if it was fair for him, then it's fair for me. The second I picked it up, he swiped it away from my hands and stood right in front of me, feverishly deleting things off his phone. I couldn't see the screen, but his hand movements said it all. He stood there, hunched and fidgety, deleting things for a solid 10 minutes. When he was finally done, he handed me his phone and said I could do whatever I wanted with it. I asked if he really thought I was that stupid. He claimed he was just saying a new lock code. I was honestly hurt. What was he hiding that he felt the need to act so shady? I left, upset and confused. Later, he admitted he'd been deleting old nudes from his phone, things he was embarrassed to still have. He apologized, over and over, and genuinely seemed sorry. We even talked it out around his roommates, who just thought he was an idiot for handling it that way, not someone untrustworthy. For the record, I truly wouldn't have cared if he still had old nudes. Everyone has a past. Fast forward about a week. A picture of my ex popped up on my boyfriend's social media feed. They share some mutual friends, although they'd never met. He was about to like the photo because our friend was in it. I warned him against it. My ex is petty and would almost certainly have stirred up something nasty. My boyfriend then asked me to show him another picture of my ex, just out of curiosity, to see what he looked like. I turned the tables and asked to see his most recent ex, which was more of a hookup than a relationship, and he obliged. While we scrolled through her profile together, he happened to mention that she was really upset when she found out he was with me. He said she sent him nudes, but he told her to stop. Then, she blocked him from texting and sent some kind of farewell on Snapchat. I didn't think much of it at the time. But a couple of nights ago, I looked up her profile myself. Something just felt off. I noticed that in the past week, my boyfriend had liked 3 of her selfies. Not any other pictures, just selfies. Normally, I wouldn't care about something so petty. But this is a girl who is clearly trying to drive a wedge between us. Liking her posts, to me, suggested that he was still talking to her or that she was still sending him things, which might also explain the whole phone incident. This sort of scenario makes me incredibly insecure because it's almost exactly what destroyed my last relationship. I hated constantly wondering what he was doing on his phone, and now it felt like a repeat. What really hurt is that when I sent my boyfriend pictures of myself, he barely responded, yet he was liking selfies from this girl who wanted to break us up. I wanted to trust him, but I couldn't understand why he needed to keep interacting with her. That really stung. The next morning, I just needed some space. I didn't answer his texts, telling myself I was busy at work, but really, I just didn't want to talk. I spent the day turning over the situation in my mind, wrestling with how to bring it up and what, exactly, I even wanted out of the conversation. Late afternoon, he finally asked what was up, why I was withdrawn. Before I even saw this text, he called me again and again. On the 4th call, I finally answered and he was sobbing. His younger brother had attempted suicide, in a very graphic and horrifying way. He was in critical condition, and nobody knew if he would survive. I dropped everything and rushed to be with him, then we went straight to the hospital together. Since then, my life has been a whirlwind of emotions: pain, guilt, confusion. I felt so horrible for ignoring him all day. He told me that with the way I was acting, he genuinely thought something had happened to me, too. When he saw me at the hospital, his first questions were about why I was mad and what he'd done wrong. I told him it wasn't worth talking about. All of my focus was on being there for him now, on supporting him through the unthinkable. I've tried to be there for him every step of the way. Instead of talking, I'm usually very chatty. I've just been there to listen, to quietly support him. I did little things like cooking food and tidying up his apartment, anything to take a little burden off his shoulders. He's been physically ill from the shock. He even passed out twice on the day he found out. Seeing him, and his parents, whom I'd only met once before, in such a terrible moment, was gut-wrenching. But despite all of it, he's shown how grateful he is for my support. He said over and over that he doesn't deserve me, that he cares about me so much. In the hospital waiting room, He kept asking his parents if they thought I was great, thanking me for coming with him. Even now, my head feels clouded and out of place. I'm still bothered by everything that happened with his phone and that girl. I know this isn't the time to bring it up, but I don't know when or even if it would be appropriate. A part of me wonders if the argument I almost started would have broken us up. A part of me wants to work things out, try to trust him, and move forward. Another part feels resentful, like I've gone above and beyond for this relationship, but he's still interacting with someone who wants to see us fail. But for now, despite all my hurt and confusion, all I want is to support him, to help him get through this awful time. I just don't know how to put my feelings aside or when I'll ever be able to bring them up again. For now, my only question is, how can I best help him, and how do I put my own wounded feelings on hold? Update 1. So, I took your advice to heart and decided to put my concerns aside for now, turning my attention completely to him and his needs. He began to handle everything much better, especially with the relief that his brother is now conscious and doing well. A few days after this turnaround, he took me out for dinner. That night, his demeanor was different. He was incredibly polite, opening doors for me, even pulling out my chair. There was a gentle sentimentality in everything he did. During dinner, he opened up and told me how grateful he was that I stayed by his side through everything, that somehow I made him a better person. I could feel the sincerity in his words, and the way he looked at me that night felt different, as if he truly understood what I meant to him. He also told me he'd decided to cut down on his phone use because he realized it was distracting him from real life, so he deleted all his social media accounts. I can't even explain the relief I felt when he volunteered to do this, especially because it was something I hadn't pushed him to do. The evening was perfect. For the first time in a while, I felt hopeful about us. It felt like we were on the same page again. But that feeling lasted barely 2 days. Suddenly, he downloaded all his social media apps back onto his phone and went right back to his old habits. I couldn't help but feel the disappointment settle in my stomach. Last night, he had to go to the hospital again. We talked on the phone afterward, but he barely mentioned anything about his brother, so I tried to respect his boundaries and let it go. But then, curiosity got the best of me. I checked that girl's Instagram account. There it was, clear as day, a new selfie that he had liked, at Hien. My heart just sank. How could I not feel let down? After everything, the promises, the meaningful gestures, it was starting to feel hollow. He's coming over tonight, and I know I can't keep this bottled up any longer. I need to talk to him about it. I'm in a terrible mood. I hate feeling like I can't trust anyone. Update 2. I talked with him tonight. The conversation stretched on for almost 2 hours. I laid out everything, described the situation in detail, told him exactly why it bothered me, how unsettled I felt. I waited, perhaps too long, hoping for some kind of explanation, some insight into what was running through his mind. But there was nothing. No real response, no clarity. Just the same elusive calm. He started talking about his plan, about what he wanted out of all this. I told him I did appreciate that, and we drifted to a few other mundane topics for a bit. But the weight of it all pulled me back. I finally admitted that I didn't know where the relationship was headed, and confessed that I couldn't be in something where I felt paranoid and uneasy so early on. That kind of distrust wasn't sustainable for me. What frustrated me the most was how he seemed to play dumb, like he didn't get what I was saying or why I was upset. That made my blood boil. I could feel the conversation was going nowhere, so I left in a hurry. Since then, I haven't talked to him. Maybe I handled things the wrong way, let my emotions lead the way instead of my head. But there were just so many feelings boiling over at once, it was impossible to hold them back. Update 3. I didn't take the advice everyone seemed to give me and break up with him after he apologized. At the time, I thought things might improve, but the relationship started to unravel in so many unexpected ways that went far beyond just trust issues. He wasn't financially responsible in the slightest. I would always be the one handling money matters, and it started to feel exhausting. To make things worse, he never took me out on dates. There was no effort there, no romance, just a dull routine. His immaturity started showing in every corner of our lives together. Communication between us became a lost art. It was practically non-existent. I would come home and share stories about my day, and all I'd get was, "That's nice," without so much as a follow-up question or an indication that he actually cared about what was happening in my world. The issues just kept piling up, dozens of them, some big and some small, but every time I tried to bring them up, they only seemed to get worse. Every conversation about our problems would spiral, and it became clear the time to end things had come. At first, he got angry and threatened to break up with me, telling me that I was victimizing him by bringing up my concerns and starting arguments. I had to remind him that not once did I raise my voice. Things only became arguments because he immediately got defensive and refused to listen. Eventually, there was this moment where he admitted he felt like an asshole and offered to work on our problems with me. I was done and told him no, but he didn't take me seriously. The next day, I called to finalize the breakup and suddenly he was telling me he didn't need to be in a relationship and wasn't codependent, as if it had anything to do with what was wrong. I actually thought we could separate on decent terms, but he ended up telling me he was pissed at me. We had a vacation coming up in May to another part of the country. I had planned it, bought both the tickets, and he reimbursed me, but when I asked what we'd do about the trip, he said he was definitely going and that if I even thought about going, I have to change my seat on the plane. It was beyond disrespectful, especially considering the whole trip was my idea and my initial purchase. At that point, $250 meant nothing compared to dealing with a child who resented me. I could feel myself losing patience, so I wanted to say a proper goodbye before things got ugly. Still, I had things at his house, including a library book I needed returned. I asked if he could either take it back for me or at least mail it, since, clearly, neither of us wanted to see each other face to face again. That's when he said he just put it in a mailbox, like that's how you return library books, and they get it to the library. I couldn't help but chuckle. I just didn't care at that point anymore. But the real kicker? Less than an hour after we broke up, he was already tweeting about using Tinder again. I couldn't believe it. I honestly just feel sorry for whoever he ends up with next. All things considered, I feel like I dodged a serious bullet. Update 4. About a week after the breakup, I got a DM on Instagram from a girl with a private account and a profile picture of a dog. It was her. She started with, "I don't want to fight," and then said she felt like he'd lied to both of us. She told me he'd told her we were basically done for weeks, that I was clingy about social media, and that he was just trying to keep the peace until the trip situation was over. My stomach dropped at that line. A second later, she sent screenshots of him asking if she'd come with him to the city we were supposed to visit in May. He wrote, "She won't go. Worst case, we just asked someone to swap so you can sit by me." The timestamp was the night he sent that Tinder tweet. I didn't respond to her right away. I just sat on my couch and let the heat rise in my cheeks until it felt like I couldn't breathe. Not even an hour later, I got an email from the airline about a minor schedule change. Our seats were still side by side, exactly where I'd put us months ago. For the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel shaken. I felt steady. I went into the reservation, checked myself in, and packed a bag. I didn't tell anyone I was still going. I needed something that wasn't him. When I got to the airport, I saw him at the gate before he saw me. He was with her. She looked smaller than I expected in person, nervous, clutching a neck pillow like it might run away. He looked right through me the first time his eyes crossed mine, then did a double take so dramatic I almost laughed. He pulled her aside and whispered in a way that was comically not subtle, then walked over like we were old friends who'd run into each other at the grocery store. "You're really going?" he said, like it was an accusation, not a question. "It's my trip," I said. "And my seat." He glanced over at her, then back at me. "Can we switch you to a different seat? There's one a few rows back. I'll buy you snacks," he added, as if a bag of pretzels was going to make me disappear. "No," I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm. "You can move if you want. I'm not." Boarding was a slow parade of almost comical awkwardness after that. He hovered near the gate desk like there was going to be a miracle, and when there wasn't, we ended up in our original row, me at the window, him in the middle, and after a tiny eternity her, sliding in on the aisle and refusing to make eye contact. He tried to strike up a conversation as soon as we buckled in. "We should talk," he said, low enough that only I could hear. "This is childish. You told her we were done while you were still in my bed," I said without looking at him. "I don't owe you a conversation on a plane." He went quiet, then fidgeted with the air vent until the poor man in the row behind us tapped his shoulder and asked him to stop. When the flight attendant came by, he ordered 2 whiskeys and drank them like medicine. She sat stiffly, scrolling through something on her phone with the brightness turned up so high I could have seen it from space. At one point, she leaned forward to ask the flight attendant if there were any other open seats with a voice so careful it was almost a whisper. There weren't. An hour into the flight, my phone pinged with an airdrop request from Jay, a note. I hit decline. 30 seconds later, it pinged again. Decline. He sighed loudly enough that a couple across the aisle looked over. Finally, he mouthed, "Please," like we were in a play. I accepted just to make it stop. The note said, "I didn't mean to hurt you. Then, you know my brother almost died. Then, you've been cruel to me. 3 separate lines, like they were bullet points in a speech. I put my phone in airplane mode and turned my face to the window, watched the patchwork of clouds slip by like a moving target. The second we landed, he did the thing where he stands up in the aisle before the seatbelt sign is even off, jittery. He looked at me like he was waiting for permission to say something. I didn't get it. As we shuffled off the plane, she touched my elbow lightly. I didn't know, she said quietly. He told me different things. For what it's worth, I said, he told me different things too. I took my carry-on and went in the opposite direction, checked into a cute little hotel I'd found the week before, and let myself exist without him for 3 full days. I ate dinner by myself, watched a street performer who made a balloon dog for a child and then bowed like it was art, took a long walk through a neighborhood with blooming jacarandas. I didn't cry. I thought I would. But I didn't. 2 things happened when I got home. First, the library emailed me a replacement fee for the lost or damaged book. I called them and the woman on the phone sounded exhausted in the way only librarians can sound. Apparently, someone had returned it by dropping it, loose, into a downtown Auspice box. It took a detour through the postal service, got stamped to hell, picked up water somewhere, and arrived at the library in a plastic bag with a note that said, "Found in machinery." The cover looked like it had been on the losing end of a bar fight. I paid the fee without arguing. It was the last $42.75 that man will ever cost me. The second thing was a voicemail from his mother. I almost didn't play it. When I did, her voice was soft and tired. She thanked me for being there during the worst of it and said she was sorry for what happened after. She said they had taken his brother to a new program and that things were stabilizing. She didn't mention her son. Just a pause, a careful breath, and then, "You were very kind." He texted that night, a paragraph about closure and adult conversations and how I had embarrassed him by not moving seats. I stared at the screen and felt nothing. No anger, no longing, just the simple understanding that he was a man who would keep circling his own drain until it pulled him under, and I didn't have to go with him. Update 5. 2 days after I got home, an email from an address with too many dots in it slid into my inbox, HR at his company, asking me to confirm removal as primary emergency contact and Fianc. I choked on my tea and called the number and the signature because curiosity is a muscle memory I haven't unlearned yet. A woman with a voice like dial tone told me he'd filled out the form in January and never updated it. I asked her to take me off and to please spell my name correctly while she was at it. She apologized in a way that suggested this was not her first rodeo with someone else's delusions. That night, a text from a number I didn't recognize lit up my phone. It was his brother. He kept it simple, "Thank you," and a link to a small community walk for suicide prevention that weekend. He said I didn't have to come, but his mom had asked him to reach out, that it would mean a lot to see a familiar face that wasn't threaded through with drama. I stared at the ceiling long enough to memorize a crack that looked like the outline of floor area, then I RSVP'd and set an alarm. It wasn't about him. The park smelled like wet grass and sunscreen. Volunteers in oversized volunteer shirts were safely pinning babs to jackets, and someone had set up a table with coffee so stale it tasted like a decision you can't take back. There were dogs in bandanas, couples stretching in coordinated leggings, a little girl carefully writing names on a poster board with a purple marker. I bought a stack of raffle tickets because the woman selling them said, "They come with a free hug," and then hesitated before asking if that was weird. It wasn't. I saw his mom before she saw me. When she did, her face unspooled in relief. She hugged me, like we were picking each other up at an airport after a long time apart. She didn't say his name. She introduced me to 3 people by my first and last, like she needed the world to know I existed in my own right. His brother looked steadier, color back in his face. He told me about the program, small, routine, boring in the best way, and we both laughed at that word like it was a miracle. Of course he came. He has radar 4 rooms with attention in them. He arrived 10 minutes late with the girl from the gate, both of them in brand new neon laces like they bought sincerity at a running store. He saw me, did the theatrical surprise face he thinks is charming, and walked over with the exact energy of a person who's about to act like a host in a house he doesn't own. "What are you doing here?" he said, pitched low and incredulous, like I'd crashed his birthday. "Your family invited me," I said. His mother, God bless her gentle spine, materialized at my shoulder. "I invited her," she said, not unkindly but with an edge that could cut bread. He blinked like someone had turned on a light. The girl hovered 2 steps behind him, eyes on her sneakers, jaw tight. There was a moment where I could see the mental calculus behind his face, the way he wanted to pull me aside and rewrite history with me in it. I took a slow sip of coffee and didn't move. The horn went off. People started jogging. I walked with his brother. We didn't talk about him. We talked about the way morning air feels different when you've slept more than 3 hours in a row. We talked about the dog with a tiny raincoat we kept lapping because he needed to pee on every meaningful blade of grass. He told me he was glad he could be bored again. He told everyone you were cruel to him on a plane, he said eventually, gaze forward, voice even. He said you made a scene. I snorted so hard I almost snorted coffee. The way he tells it, I said, I set off the fire alarm. He smiled without looking at me. Next time you make a scene, he said, invite me. Sounds better than watching him adjust a vent. At the finish line, a lady in a visor pressed a banana into my hand like I'd achieved something holy. They announced raffle winners over a speaker that cut in and out like a bad memory. I didn't even remember what I'd put my tickets in for until they called my number and handed me a basket wrapped in too much cellophane. Inside, a library tote bag that said check yourself out in big block letters, 2 paperbacks I actually wanted to read, and a mug with tiny boats marching in a line like ants. I laughed so hard the visor lady started laughing, too, like she wasn't on the joke. I slung the tote over my shoulder. It was heavier than it looked, satisfying in a way I can't explain. He cornered me once more, near the popsicle cooler. We should talk, he said, like the conversation was a train he'd almost caught. This isn't healthy. You're right, I said, cheerful as sunshine. It isn't. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The girl drifted over, the way you do when you're waiting for someone to be done with their mess. She met my eyes for a beat. I didn't know about the fiancé key thing, she said, voice small, curiosity threaded through the apology. Me neither, I said. We both looked at him. He pretended to see someone he knew on the other side of the park and waved. On my way out, his mom pressed something into my palm. It was a folded program with a note in her looping hand, thank you for showing up when it mattered. Not all of us did. I put it in the tote with the paperbacks and the mug and the little bloom of relief I didn't expect to feel. He texted later a paragraph that started with, can we at least agree to be adults? And ended with, it was inappropriate for you to accept a raffle prize at my family's event. I typed and erased 3 different jokes about how I'd put the tote in the mailbox and hope it made it back to me. Instead, I sent a photo of the note from his mother and then the single word, blocked. Then I did it. Update 6. 3 mornings of quiet went by like a trick I didn't want to look at too closely. Then a voicemail from a woman who sounded like a sugar packet. Hi, this is Camille from Norwood Jewelers. Your ring is ready for pickup. I listened to it twice, like maybe I'd misheard ring as thing, like this was about a watch battery or a charm for a dog. I called back and asked her to repeat the name on the order. Mine. And his. Neat as a math problem. I asked when it had been dropped off. Late January. I sat there with my mouth open long enough that my cat, who was not actually my cat, just a neighbor's anarchist tabby who thinks my windowsill is public land, pressed his paw against the screen like he was trying to reboot me. I went because curiosity and I have a codependent relationship. The store smelled like lemon polish and jewelry cleaner, and everything in it gleamed like a choice I wouldn't make. Camille brought out a small white box with a flourish that suggested she left for this exact moment, the reveal. The ring was classic and obvious in the way a movie would write it: oval stone, skinny gold band, a little too big in a way that felt like a dare. Inside the band was an engraving that made my stomach perform a complicated dance, 2 initials, his and mine, and a date that fell 3 days after the night he told me he deleted his social media because he wanted to be more present. He'd picked present like it was a theme party. I asked Camille if he'd left any other instructions. Just that it was a rush, she said, like I might swoon over his efficiency. We've been trying to reach you for weeks, his card number bounced and we needed confirmation on the pickup contact. I took a breath that felt like it had edges. I told her I wasn't picking it up, that I didn't consent to my name being on anything in that box, and she nodded like this was not her first time shepherding a woman away from a story she didn't write. On my way out, I bought myself a tiny silver stacking ring off a tray labeled sale, an apology to my own hands for what they'd almost been asked to carry. I ate a croissant outside that shattered delicately down my coat and realized I wasn't trembling. That afternoon a secondary number blinked on my phone, a dentist's office with a kind of on-hold music that sounds like a keyboard learning to walk. We're calling the emergency contact 4J, the receptionist said, Chris, unfriendly in the way of someone who has argued with insurance for a living. He's under sedation for a wisdom tooth extraction and needs a ride. I felt the absurdity land like a slapstick pie. I told her politely, then firmly, that I wasn't that for him, that I hoped he'd updated his forms by now. She put me on hold and came back less sharp. Do you have another contact? I wouldn't give out numbers without permission, so I told her to call his mother's cell and gave her the general practice number. She sighed like 1,000 other women had ever so slightly saved her day. 30 minutes later his brother texted me a thumbs up emoji and nothing else. I sent a heart back. That was enough. 2 days after, a medium-sized cardboard box with my name but his handwriting appeared on my welcome mat, the return address scrawled wrong like he'd tried to disguise it and only succeeded at making it look like a treasure map. Inside was my gray sweater I'd been mentally mourning, a charger I'd forgotten existed, a lone mug I'd given him that said Big Feelings Club, and a Ziploc full of miscellaneous screws and wall anchors like he thought I might be missing the structural integrity of my life. Underneath, folded into squares that kept trying to unfurl, was our old flight itinerary with the word swap highlighted in neon and an arrow pointing from my seat to the row where he wanted me to disappear. Tucked between the pages was a photo booth strip from a bar we'd gone to once. He'd cut himself out of 3 of the frames and left mine intact. I laughed in a way that made my upstairs neighbor knock once on the floor, lightly, like he was cheering me on. I thought that might be the end of the circus. Then his mother asked me to meet her for coffee to return a casserole dish I'd put lasagna in the night everything broke. We sat by the window in a cafe that served drinks in mug, with tiny chips along their edges like they'd lived real lives. She looked smaller than at the walk, softer around the eyes in a way that had nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with relief. She handed me the dish wrapped in a kitchen towel with roosters on it, awkward and sweet. We told him he has to clean his lists out, she said, almost laughing at the phrase. HR, the dentist, his bank. We've tightened some things. He's angry about it. He'll survive. She didn't ask me for anything. She told me his brother was still steady, that the program was boring on purpose, that boredom tasted like safety and they were acquiring a taste. We didn't say his name until the end. She pulled a folded paper from her purse and slipped it toward me like contraband. It was a note he'd tried to send through her, 3 short lines I recognized. I didn't mean to hurt you. You know my brother almost died. You've been cruel to me. I handed it back and she nodded, relieved I wouldn't take even that. On my walk home, the girl from the gate texted me from her own number this time, stripped of the dog avatar and just herself. She said she'd moved out of his place on a Tuesday with 2 trash bags and a taxi that smelled like grape air freshener. She attached a photo of a pothos with my name on the nursery tag, dirt under her thumb. He said it was yours, she wrote. Thought you might want it back. I told her she could keep it, that the plant clearly had survival instincts and she might as well benefit. She sent one more message, a little punch of honesty I wasn't expecting. He's telling people you stole a ring from him. I sent her a picture of my tiny silver band, said, if I'm stealing, I'm doing it wrong. She wrote, I figured, with a period that felt like an exhale. The next morning I did something embarrassingly domestic that felt like a declaration. I went to the library with my tote and the mug with the ants that are actually books and paid another late fee on an entirely different book because apparently I am who I am no matter the season. The librarian with the exhausted voice had a sticker on her name tag that said ask me about boundaries. I pointed and laughed and she smiled like we were in on a very old joke. I checked out 2 new paperbacks and didn't even glance at the mailbox on my way home. I don't have to put anything in there I want back. Update 7. There is a specific pitch of phone call that makes your spine sit up straighter even before your brain has read the caller ID. This is Detective Alvarez with the Property Crimes Unit, he said, careful, polite in the way of someone who doesn't want to startle a deer. We're following up on a report of a stolen engagement ring. Your name came up. For a second I thought I was going to laugh, the kind that ends in a cough. I told him I had never touched a ring that wasn't attached to a keychain. He asked if I was willing to meet at the jeweler where the item was allegedly purchased to clear it up. I said yes because I am, against my will, someone who shows up with documents. Norwood Jewelers looked exactly like a place where people make expensive decisions under good lighting. Emile was there in a cardigan that could double as a thesis on appropriate workplace knitwear. She clocked me, then the detective, and set a small white box on the counter with the satisfying seriousness of a game show reveal. She slid it open. The ring glinted like an accusation. This has not left the store, she said, voice bright as Windex. We've been calling about the balance. The card on file declines. We have the original order and the engraving request. We have the unpaid invoice. We have she tapped a stack of carbonless cop is more paper than a tax audit. Detective Alvarez looked relieved in the way of a man whose morning had just become shorter. He glanced at me, then at the paperwork. So, not stolen, he said, and wrote unfounded on a form that looked small and mean next to all that glossy jewelry. I signed a statement that I had not, in fact, stolen a fantasy. Camille offered me a lint-free wipe for my pride. We'll be re-engraving that band, she said cheerfully. Back to a plain oval. Somebody else's initials can go in it someday. Happens more than you'd think. She paused. Do you want a polishing cloth? I bought another tiny silver ring instead, a neat answer to a question nobody had asked me out loud. I walked out and the day smelled like it had just washed its face. 2 afternoons later her manila envelope with a courthouse return address appeared in my mailbox like an invitation to a party hosted by a spreadsheet. Small claims. He was suing me for airline seat interference, raffle prize misappropriation, and reputational damages, which is a phrase that should only be permitted in a Dickens novel. The dollar amount was $42.75, plus court costs. I had to sit down on my steps because the universe has a sense of humor that does not apologize. I went to the hearing because if I didn't it would itch like a sweater until June. The courtroom was windowless and hummed with a collective frequency of 10 vending machines. The judge was a woman with her hair pinned up in a way that said she hadn't had a dramatic haircut in 20 years and didn't need one. He arrived in a blazer that still had the manufacturer stitch holding the vent closed. The girl from the gate was not with him. He carried a manila folder bulging with what I later learned was printouts of his own text to me and a boarding pass with my name circled so many times it looked like a target. He went first. He said Your Honor a lot like a child who had learned a new word at school. He said I had publicly humiliated him on an airplane and stolen a basket at a charitable event intended for his family. He tried to hand the judge our photo booth strip with himself cut out of it, like that negative space proves something. The judge looked at the strip, then at him, then at me. Do you have receipts? She asked him, and he blinked, confused by the way receipts were not a metaphor. For damages, she added, kind. When it was my turn, I slid the jeweler's statement across the table like a magician performing the world's least exciting trick. I said I had not changed seats because I paid for mine. I said I put my name into a jar, my number was called, and a lady in a visor handed me a tote bag. I did not say anything about neon shoelaces or Air Vans or how rage looks when it hides in a nice shirt. The judge sighed the sigh of someone who had seen much weirder, and dismissed the case with a stamp so firm it felt like a bell tone. He opened his mouth like a fish who had suddenly noticed the water around him. The bailiff's eyebrows said absolutely not. I walked out into noon, which felt straightforward and bright, like clarity had a temperature. On the steps I ran into Detective Alvarez again, coincidence or the small town feeling you get in a big place when the same handful of things happen to the same handful of people. He was carrying a coffee that looked like hope. We closed your file, he said, amiable. He tried to call this morning to, amend his report. We told him not to do that again. He didn't have to explain amend. That evening, a text from a number I didn't recognize materialized like a ghost that had knocked before entering. It was the girl from the gate with just, I have your pathos anyway, which made me laugh because I had told her to keep it like I was getting away a cat at a train station in a movie. She sent a photo. It was draped in new leaves, alive in a way that made my stomach loosen a notch. Good, I wrote back. It likes the window. She replied, I put it on a shelf too high for him to adjust the vent. Something in my chest unclenched and took a little walk around. His mother left me one more voicemail, 10 seconds long, like she'd parked illegally. We're very sorry about the police, she said. He's working on being less dramatic around consequences. Then, lower, we changed the passwords. I didn't need more than that. You can hear a boundary snap into place if you listen for the right frequency. When I got home there was a business card tucked under my doormat from a storage facility 2 neighborhoods over. Account verification needed, the note on the back read, my name paired with his in neat block letters. I called because if the last few weeks had taught me anything, it's that man will put your name on things you've never seen. The manager sounded like every coach I ever had in gym class. Looks like he listed you as co-lessee in February, he said. Hasn't paid for 3 months. Auction date next week. I told him to take my name off and that I would not, under any circumstance, be participating in whatever treasure chest this was. He clicked a few keys and cleared me like a bouncer with good taste. We see this a lot, he said, not unkind. People put other people's names on things and hope it makes them more real. The next morning I brought the exhausted librarian a coffee and she looked at me like I knew where the good pen caps were kept. I checked my books back and on time like it was a sacrament. On my way out, there was a flyer taped crookedly to the corkboard by the door, a community class at the plant shop around the corner repotting and propagation for beginners. I signed up and showed up and pressed my fingers into dirt that didn't belong to anybody else's mess. The instructor had a tattoo that said water me on her wrist and made a joke about it before anyone could. I split a succulent into 3, delicate and certain. I put one on my windowsill and one near my desk and gave one to the neighbor whose tabby believes in squatters' rights. The plant sat in the light and did exactly what it was supposed to do, which felt, for once, like a thing I could count on. He hasn't reached me again. Maybe he finally found a vent he can adjust without an audience. Maybe he's writing a new report and learning that a stamp doesn't argue back. Maybe it doesn't matter. Last night I made pasta with too much garlic and read both paperbacks from the raffle like a person who had never met a courtroom. There is a deep relief in watching something grow quietly where you set it down. It's smaller than a grand gesture and louder than a ring. It doesn't need you to move seats. It doesn't need you to solve its appetite. It asks the simplest question: can I have light? Can I have water? Can I have a little room? I made room. It was not hard.